Good evening, everybody. Good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, of course. I don't think good morning, but hey, we could have some, actually, I think I have spotted a couple of our Australian viewers in the chat, actually. So good morning is actually probably extremely valid, Sean. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining us this evening on Geeksvana Live. Really looking forward to this one. Tonight, we're going to be talking about community-based organisations, and this is coming off the back of the recent FAA memo that's been released, AC 9151C, which is basically looking at allowing people to start applying the process of becoming a CBO, a community-based organisation. So tonight, we're going to find out what they are, what it's designed to do, which bits are law, which bits aren't, which bits are guidance, how all of that affects things. And we're going to be joined this evening by Dave Messina of FPV Freedom Coalition, and really taking a deeper dive into the things you need to know rather than a deeper dive into every single element of it as such. Now, if you've got any questions on this, please do tag at Geeksvana in the chat. We're also going to be looking at how all of this actually really links into the UK as well, because over here in the UK we do have organisations. There isn't any kind of mandatory requirement to join one or anything else, but they do get certain benefits over non-members, such as the good old Article 16 authorisation, which is, I think, an authorisation I've mentioned more on this channel than most other things over the last couple of years. But yes, so do let us know if you have any questions. Do tag at Geeksvana in the chat. We will run through them as and when I spot them, but also if there's any to mop up at the end as well. So without further ado, it's enough of my voice, isn't it? Thank you again, everybody who are the early viewers who have already come in this evening. We will get back to chat and say Freedom Coalition is, and what it is you guys are about, really.
FPV Freedom Coalition is a not-for-profit organization. We've been in operation for a little over 3 years. We advocate recreational FPV UAS or drone operators, as well as wing operators. And we have taken a collaborative approach working with the FAA. That's who we advocate to on behalf of recreational operators across the United States. And also working on education of pilots and providing guidance and understandable, just like you said, what you need to know, as opposed to all of the detail behind the regulations in drones and UAS.
Okay, and you are a membership body, so people that I've just put a link in the description to it. People can come along and join, and obviously receive benefits, and obviously also that in itself helps to facilitate and support your work. Which is, of course, it has quite a wide aspect to the types of work that FPV Freedom Coalition actually get involved in.
It does, and we've gotten quite busy, and it's taking up quite a bit of time. We are all volunteer. There are 6 core members. 2 of us are dedicated pretty much full time to this effort, and 4 of us have day jobs that we're fitting in.
Wow.
So we are busy, and we're also partnering very closely with Flight Test, and so that expands our reach, and we expand their knowledge and reach, and it's a great complementary relationship, and a Flight Test with over 2 million subscribers. So we're working to get our reach a little better, and we're also gained a great reputation working closely on the variety of task forces and aviation rulemaking committee efforts. And so those relationships are with the FAA, as well as airframe manufacturers, as well as associations in crewed aircraft, as well as unmanned aircraft.
And the people within your organization, again, they are the type of people that I could spend many hours sat chatting to. Frankly, there are a few people in the industry, a few groups in the industry where I would just like to go and open a bottle of something and spend quite a few hours solving the world's drone issues, frankly. And I feel that your core group is one of those groups, because you've got a good wide collective there of some very intelligent people within the industry and the hobby, but also people that are able to get things done. And you've just added a new member as well.
We have Blunty's joined us, and it's Blunty FPV, I believe, is his handle, and we're delighted. Blunty works with Joshua Bardwell he also has a background in working on regulations and rules and laws. That's in the cannabis industry, but it's completely applicable because we're working with an executive or regulatory agency with the FAA, and so it's rules that they promulgate, and we work with them and work with the FAA. So Blunty's persistence, his attention to detail, as well as his extensive experience in FPV and great knowledge base have been a great addition. We've also making visible David Wallace, our marketing VP, and Josh Cook, Dan Oakes, and Alex Suarez fill out the rest of the 6.
Absolutely fantastic, and you know, some real heavyweights there, and one of the things that impresses me about FPV Freedom Coalition is it is that multi-layered approach. So you're not a group of people who just talk to the FAA and get on the committees and work in task groups and that type of thing. You're all the way down through it. You collaborate, as you say, with people like Flight Test, etc. There are many doors open to you in industry and hobby, but you're also there for the hobbyists. You live stream your town hall meetings on YouTube, and is it on Facebook as well?
It is, and it's also on Discord, and we do that every other week. We also a lot of teasing about we have an old guy as well as Alex Suarez is very young. He's in engineering school and doing great. And so we have a range of age as well as skills as well as backgrounds. And so that diversity really echoes what we're trying to get at. And so we've done things like provided the FPV experience at Flight Fest, which is a fantastic event with 2,000 people showing up to fly model airplanes and now flying FPV drones and have a good time and fix them and talk and just establish new and great relationships.
Yeah, and it very much fills me with the same kind of respect as organizations here in the UK like FPV UK with Simon Dale, who are again very connected throughout the regulatory side of things, but they're also extremely connected, and everything they do is for the UK FPV and drone hobby, but certainly specific, hence the FPV UK name. So yes, I mean it's a fantastic thing. So that's the sales bit over. You can tell that I am 100% an FPV Freedom Coalition supporter, and if I were in the right geographic zone, I would certainly be a member. So tonight we're going to talk about a recent update from the FAA, but very quickly, just going to say very quickly thank you to a few people in the chat. Now, Ichisak FPV, I have to read these things out, but there you go, no matter what their username is. Am I saying your username correctly? He's been a member for 13 months of the Geek Squad, so thank you very much, sir. I really appreciate that. Mark Big Bear with a $10 super chat. Hi, guys. Another great video, Sean. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Hope you're well. And Johnny DRC, a $3 super chat, super sticker. Thank you for that, Johnny. I know you've been looking forward to this show, and actually Johnny, I hope you're doing well, because Johnny's just had and in fact he's showing he's a 13 month member as well. He's just showing he's actually just had an operation, so I hope you're getting over that well, because I know he's extremely frustrated to not be out flying at the moment, and yeah, as any of us who are passionate about the hobby know, that that's really something which is a real draw on life, as it were. So I hope you get out there flying again very, very soon, sir. So yes, so as I said, we're here today to talk about a release. So we will very quickly show that release and run through it from the FAA, and then we will discuss and dissect. So this was released on October the 24th, and it's the FAA Updates Recreational Drone Flying Guidance. The US Department of Transport's Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, today issued guidance on how to become an FAA recognized community-based organization for recreational drone flying. Under federal law, recreational drone flyers must follow the safety guidelines of an FAA recognized CBO. The organization is required to develop its safety guidelines in coordination with the FAA, and an applicant may wish to tailor them to a particular type of unmanned aviation. The FAA's guidance, Advisory Circular 9157C, which we will be dipping into this evening, provides a comprehensive list of recommended safety guidelines that applicants may consider when using in their application. Organizations that meet the legal definition of a CBO may apply for FAA recognition through the FAA's Drone Zone website. So it is an open thing for anybody that feels that they can meet those criteria to apply for. What does this memo actually mean in simple terms?
Well, if folks were listening to you, Sean, very, very carefully, you wove that very well.
Thank you.
So the law is mandated by the U.S. Congress that individuals flying UAS, small UAS, must follow the guidelines of a community-based organization. Okay, so that sounds like backed up by law. Now, I try to be specific, and when I say law, I mean a law that's passed by Congress. Only Congress in the United States can pass federal laws, and then the agencies pass rules and regulations. And then you describe that the FAA approves recommended guidelines. So it's like, oh, okay, so is that a law? No. Is that a rule? Well, not quite. It's an advisory circular, which is guidance, and all over the front of it, they say does not have the force and effect of, and is not meant to bind the public. However, the FAA has the authority to approve guidelines. So my organization, the FPV Freedom Coalition, has applied to become a community-based organization, and we are a 501c3, check. That's one of the requirements. We work with community, check. We work with education in aviation specific, check. So we check all of the boxes, and we've had a set of safety guidelines out and available since 2020, check. However, now we anticipate that the FAA may take out the fine tools and
your kind patience there, and thank you everybody for hanging around in the chat as well. I really do appreciate it. For some reason, and I think I've had it once or twice in the past, but since I had the new system, the new studio and everything, we've never actually had it, but a complete system failure. But these things are sent to try us. I think I've read that somewhere. And we have come through. So you were telling us about the fact that obviously the FAA is it's going to be interesting in terms of seeing how the FAA react to the applications and what kind of feedback they give, essentially. So the FPV Freedom Coalition is, of course, on that list of applicants. Is there anything that you feel is particularly contentious within your application that you're sort of hoping to get, that you think they might sort of push back on? Are there particular areas of concern, I suppose, would be the...
Well, there are a number of areas of concern, and so the difference in what we saw in early versions of the advisory circular and what was finally published were two things. One, the definition of a fixed site and a FRIA, two types of UA area to fly, and then the safety guidelines had more detail. And so our safety guidelines are very generic, and we frequently simply reflect back to the regulations. And we want folks to be safe and enjoy themselves, and we're trying to establish minimum friction. So go fly, don't be nuts, and pay attention to manned or crewed aircraft, and learn a little bit about airspace. So, and you don't have to do chapter and verse on that, but where you're flying, if you're flying in an airspace that requires authorization, learn how to use a loft, our recommended Lance approval. So our Civil Aviation Authority to gain authorization to fly in controlled airspace.
Okay. So it's essentially very, very similar actually to one of our operational authorizations sort of process in this country, from the point of view that you don't want to make it too complicated, because then you actually tie people's hands as far as, and that's one of the things that we often get back from people, where they will ask, Sean, can I get a specific answer to this? Can I fly my drone in this scenario? And sometimes, frustratingly, we'll get a reply back from the CAA or the police or whoever it's directed at, and they'll give a sort of common sense approach type of reaction to it. And actually, Callum Holland from the CAA, in one of my recent interviews with him, stated that actually they don't want to be too specific, because that does tie your hands, that does stop you from flying. So, and that sounds like that's the approach that you guys want to take, from the point of view of it being as hands off as possible, whilst reinforcing the entire idea of a CBO, i.e., supporting people to safe flight.
Right, and there's common sense, and then there's overreach, and the FAA has, I think, overstepped a bit, in that they are recommending ground operations to be incorporated into safety guidelines of a CBO. The FAA has no authority for anything happening on the ground. And so while it makes great sense for us to educate kids and adults about, what are the things that we worry about in FPV? Batteries and propellers. And again, common sense, but we don't want to get crazy about it. But now the FAA is suggesting that be codified into our guidelines. And if you don't adhere to those guidelines, what's the ramification? So and they've, by mixing this in,
yes,
we're trying to be firm. We don't want people to weaponize their drone and fly into a TFR. That's awful. But it's the same level of infraction if you don't document that you broke a prop. And so it's like, so we're trying to add a little bit of common sense into it.
Yes, and in actual fact, we're going through the same thing here as well, and with reporting, needing to report almost everything. And I had a live stream again where we discussed that proposition, and my FPV audience just said, "Do you really want to know every time I crash my quad? Because you're going to get it's going to crash the system." And there is a two-sided sword to it, of course, that people are worried sometimes about reporting incidents and that type of thing, but also, of course, on the other side of it, it's good to show that lots of incidents happen without injury, without property damage, that type of thing, etc., that actually these things are happening without any implications, without any issues. But yeah, I could certainly understand. I think I would start to have an issue if the land operations side of things started to be something which was prescribed, because of course, as you say, it feels a little bit overreachy, and it's concerning because of where does it lead to as well, of course.
Right. Interestingly, this speaks to the scope of what we're working on in FPV Freedom Coalition. One of the last points is safety incident reporting program, similar to, I think in the UK, is it CHIPS or CHPS?
CHIRPS, yes.
CHIRPS.
Yes.
Pardon me. And so in the States, we have a program, UAS ASRS, the Aviation Safety Reporting System. It's anonymized or de-identified, and so it's managed by NASA, who is viewed as sufficiently separated from the FAA to be away from whomever is going to enforce an issue. And we're just wrapping up a task force within the drone safety team, and this is an organization of 80 organizations and the FAA that I applied to for the FPVFC. We're on it, and I was leading a task force that as I say, we're just wrapping up to make recommendations. And this was discussed by Brian Wynn at the AAAC, the FAA Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee, on the 20th of October, where Pete Dumont was the presenter, and he described how what we're trying to do is make it simpler again. I'll allow someone to pick up a phone. Maybe it would be an augmentation to one of these Lance applications. So I'm flying in controlled airspace. I've got my authorization, and I crashed. Okay, this was my doing, and from a best practices perspective, what could I share? So within an app, or I pull the information from Lance, and I put a couple of words in about what happened, and all of that goes to NASA, to a single repository. It's the individual's personnel information, the PII, is stripped out, and then there's also a notion of a get out of jail free card that is a holdover from crewed aviation, where if you're investigated for doing something wrong and you had the wherewithal to self-report, the FAA takes that into consideration in the enforcement phase. So this is why. So in this long CBO advisory circular, they've included, well, maybe the guidelines should include self-reporting. It's like, why aren't we using UAS? So I have nothing in our guidelines on self-reporting of incidents. I anticipate that the FAA will say, well, how about self-reporting? And I'll say, great. Well, we'll tout the UAS ASRS, but only when we make it a little simpler, because it takes about a half hour to fill out a form today. So
excellent. Yeah, no, indeed.
Some work required.
And there are some crossover points there between crewed and uncrewed aviation that need a lot more analysis as far as how valid they are and how much use they are in terms of information, because again, you will end up being inundated, and it will crash the system.
We had a huge it was a drone advisory committee, now the AAAC tasking group on safety culture, and this we had must have been close to 100 people involved in this. And one of the basic tenets coming out of that was one size does not fit all, and meaning that the regulation and rules and reporting should be commensurate with the risks taken. And the FAA buys into that. Okay. And so we have to remind everyone we work with that, one size does not fit all. We have to have the reporting commensurate with the risk.
Yes, which makes absolute sense, because there are people in the chat right now saying, this sounds crazy. This is crazy. In fact, Reptilian Research Redux has said, and others have saying, this sounds great. And actually, Jason, GMI Visuals, actually 100% agreeing with with the statement you've just made by saying, great for commercial operators, hobbyists no, especially not FPV. And that's exactly what you're saying in terms of this should be stepped in terms of the risk side of things. If it's an FPV flyer flying his FPV in an almost sort of shielded operations type scenario, he's zipping around a field enjoying himself, etc., and he cartwheels and hits the ground. That never happens in FPV, of course. Then there is no risk. But a commercial operator flying a matrice in a urban area, and they have a problem and they clip a building or something, or they do have an issue and they have to come down and have a heavy landing, then I think all of us can see the valid information and the safety implications in that side of things. And I do feel that in some scenarios, that's where the regulator starts to lose the audience a little bit, if that makes sense. Starts to lose.
Exactly.
They're not bringing people with them.
As we keep saying, unrealistic regulations will result in widespread non-compliance, and so we can argue and say, oh, this is a great idea, but if it's unreasonable, people will not comply. Yeah. And so that's that's why we strive to common sense in a lot of the things we're working on.
Indeed, which is excellent, and that is the frustration, because when we sit and we talk about regulation and we talk about guidance and we talk about all the different layers, as you were talking before, from law to regulation down to policy down to guidance, etc. It is something which can be frustrating, because often things will come across as if they are trying to sort of overreach and be too wordy, and this is just too much, and I'm just not going to follow any of it, which is exactly what you were just saying. But of course, often when you dig into what's actually behind that, that isn't actually what they're looking to do. They're actually not even looking sometimes for the information they think they're looking for, if that makes sense. The regulators' actual initial goal, as it were, wasn't to cause that kind of issue, which is why I think things like task groups and the fact that they have people like FPVFC on those task groups, and we have similar here in the UK with advisory groups, etc. I think that's good, because it's getting the hobby and the industry back in the room. to say, actually, you just don't need that. You do not, trust me, you do not need to know every time someone breaks a prop on an FPV drone or has a cracked frame.
And one of the stipulations is they want maintenance, inspections, and minimum conditions for safe operation. They want also a statement of what operations to ensure that recreational flyers take proper care between maintenance UA flights. So again, that's a ground operation. Now, what's interesting is as we partner with Flight Test and you watch a lot of the flight test videos, you'll see a constant reminder: don't do this with your prop on. Don't, and think about what you're doing with this is a lithium polymer battery. Be sense, because the audience are newcomers if they're adults and children, and so we're trying to to ingrain the idea of be safe. Think about that.
Yeah.
Those propellers are really dangerous. And it's not to disparage or to condescend to the audience, but it's just these are the things that are really important, because in electric operations of UAS, there have been 0 fatalities in the United States. So what problems are we trying to solve? And safety first, just physical safety of the operator, and unauthorized flights. I didn't know I was flying in Class E. I didn't, I thought that what's class, Class C, well, Class D. So we want, again, we're not asking people to become, Part 107 pilots, although that's a great idea. But we are asking the recreational operator to know where you are, where you're going to fly, figure that out. And here's how you can get help. Get onto this app, and it'll figure it out.
No, indeed, which is an interesting point, actually, and I've given a couple of talks recently on here in the UK on drone safety and the regulations and that type of thing. And one of the things I'm starting to focus on more and more is actually telling people, focus on the drones that you're flying. So don't necessarily learn every single part of the regulation or even the guidance, etc. necessarily. That will come over time, but initially focus on, so if you are flying a Mini 2 sub 250 gram drone, focus on the rules that are surrounding your flight and get to know those. And as you say, airspace, of course, is an important part of that. Just very quickly, thank you, Jason, GMI Visuals, for becoming a member of the Geek Squad. I appreciate it, sir. Welcome. Another part of the guidelines which I've heard talked about since this memo was released is around FPV minimum proficiency. What will that actually mean? Because again, this is one of the ones which is sort of sparked in the FPV groups on Facebook and on Discord and everywhere else, etc., saying, hang on a minute, what does this actually mean?
Yeah, I don't think they have any clue. And so one of the things that was tossed in there is you really should be able to handle the aircraft in line of sight first. And coming to FPV from 3 or 4 decades of flying fixed wing RC models, if completely line of sight, then okay, that's sort of normal. But once you get you put those goggles on, and everyone, most people here listening know the skills can get a little rusty flying a line of sight, and so there's a certain level of common sense that says, it's a good idea to be able to take off and hover, because every time you build a new FPV drone, it's a good idea to just lift it off with the goggles off,
which
because
many people do. Yeah, absolutely. They'll do
because you're faster on hitting that that cut switch as it flips into the air and goes, oh, props are on backwards, or motor resources are wrong. Why did it just do this this chicken dance into the ground again? So they're limited, and to me, focus on what you're flying. That's a great piece of advice. And we certainly, when we teach young people and adults, we recommend that they stick with a single aircraft. And if they keep breaking it, then buy a backup. But if you can afford it, but focusing on the same aircraft so that you get accustomed to that, and then what are its capabilities. Start with the equipment, get safe with it, and then think about what's your environment, where are you flying, and what are the capabilities of that aircraft where you're flying.
Yeah, because it's an interesting concept in terms of FPV minimum proficiency, because of course, if someone is, in my opinion, if you're flying FPV, then you probably, the fact that the flight lasts more than 20 seconds, you have some proficiency in the fact that you are able to operate that drone. I know that there are stabilized FPV drones and that type of thing, etc. But it to me, I don't know, it kind of smacks a little bit of, do they understand the audience again, from the point of view that if they're talking about, you need to be able to control the drone line of sight, etc., without goggles and that type of thing. Well, yeah, yes, and I think most people, as you were explaining, most people certainly do when they've built a new quad, they will do the hover test, the same as the scale heli guys and everybody else. They will always want to test their hundreds of dollars before they write it off completely. But yeah, it is a frustration, and it's the kind of guidance and rules that I think start to put people off.
Yeah, I agree. And we've talked about in the BVLOS ARC and other discussions with the FAA and with tasking groups about, well, would it make sense to have a practical, that is a physical test or exam, to demonstrate proficiency? And at a club level, it makes great sense. Let me give you a hand. Let's make sure that this aircraft is safe, and you just walk through it. Great. Okay, you're signed off, and this has been in model airplanes a tradition for a long time. At a formal level, and a signing off for you, so contemplate the Part 107 has a practical added to it. The cost of adding that into a federal level is astronomical. Now, for the Drone Responders Organization, working with NIST, another international standards body, has come up with a practical that a number of public safety organizations across the U.S. are taking this test. Now, again, this speaks to FPV proficiency. It's a series of buckets across a pitch that you fly up. You have to be able to fly down at an angle. You have to be able to navigate in the air. It's very simple. So if those of us who've been doing this for a couple of years, it's like, really, that's the test?
Yes.
But it makes a ton of sense if if you're a new law officer and you were asked, hey, we want you to operate this drone, and I didn't have to get a Part 107, and I've never flown a model before, so wow. So good. So then they set some level of minimum requirement if you're going to be doing this as part of your job. Again, what does that have to do with insisting that this become part of the guidelines that we talk about in our safety guidelines?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
If we are requested, if the FAA comes back and says, "Oh no, you really need something in there," we will try to come up with something that's common sense, that says, "All right, you can take off, hover, and that to me that would be enough."
Yeah.
Forward flight, being able to
Exactly.
to articulate a pattern. No, not required.
Yeah, and I can sense the frustration when it does come to talking about sort of ground operations, etc., and how that you are trying to resist, and that's where good
Right.
CBOs are going to come into this.
Right, and again, I just want to emphasize, we are really pro safety, both for
yes,
first
yes.
and foremost, we don't want people to burn their houses down by overcharging or over discharging lipos. We don't want them to cut themselves up with propellers. We're only concerned that we don't want that added to the guidelines because it's outside of the authority of the FAA. Please let us take care of that as a CBO. That's first and foremost to us. One of our most popular articles on our website is batteries, and so we take it, and again, not trying to condescend. People are like, what do you mean batteries? Well, to a newcomer, like, ooh, you better take this seriously.
No, exactly, and I think it is an important thing, and it's also important, as you were saying earlier on, to this is an example of overcomplication, where actually there is a general safety that if you're in that hobby, if you're in FPV, there is a general safety that's going to come around from the fact that you want to keep yourself safe and you want to keep your home safe and everything else with batteries and everything else like that. So and I've benefited particularly from the local club side of things as well. There is a certain safety level that actually being around fellow flyers and that type of thing, actually in an actual flying club, and I was lucky enough to join a very traditional one where they taught me about pits and you know, even with my little Mavics, etc., that not arming it and turn, you know, ensuring the controllers off and this type of thing, and all sorts of different things, and that level of safety just became inbuilt. But again, I wouldn't expect to see that from the regulator in terms of actually insisting, as it were, within guidelines that happens. So
yeah, to us, it's the notion of a checklist.
Yes.
And so we have a number of pre-flight checklists that we've published up on our website. And again, for a newcomer, it's really helpful. If for no other reason that you get to a flying location and you realize, oh, I forgot something. You go down the list. I have 2 batteries and I forgot the charger. Or I have the props for the other aircraft. Yes, I've done each of these and many other combinations. So for a newcomer, makes sense. And things like check the aircraft, that it's in acceptable shape to fly again. Oh, you just crashed. Maybe you should take a careful look at it. Are the motors, is something cracked that you don't notice at first glance? So again, not things that that we want to codify into guidelines, but we are all about good practice, and using a mental checklist, if not a physical checklist, of this is a good practice of how to fly, and it so becomes second nature, and then it's easy.
So it's really where CBOs have the potential to blur those lines of what is the FAA's job and remit and what isn't, and also preventing certain things becoming that way almost through grandfathering and sort of the backdoor regulation as we call it. So it's good to hear that you're aware of that with your application. I hope other CBOs are as diligent in terms of not just wanting to check the boxes to get their thing approved. Certainly, one of the things that interests me on this, as far as our next topic, is that although we have community organizations here in the UK, it isn't mandatory to be a member. It isn't required to be a member, although that they have got thousands of members. But certainly there are hundreds of thousands of drone flyers who are not a member of one. What are the implications for not being a member of a CBO? And also, if I then joined a CBO but I didn't sort of follow the checklist, etc., that type of thing, what are the implications? Of course, because we have this whole thing of, although it's guidance from the CBO, you are required to, the law does require you to follow the guidance of a CBO to be a member and to follow their guidance, or the guidance itself isn't. So where is the trigger?
In the States, there can be no implication whatsoever. You do not have to join a CBO to legally fly. You do have to follow a set of safety guidelines. You can select your CBO of choice, and the advisory circular goes into some good detail about this. If you fly turbines, then find a CBO that focuses on turbine fixed wing. Or if you fly large scale, third scale, half scale, it's going to be above 55 pounds. So find a CBO that specializes in that, or with us with FPV. And so that's a positive. So you don't have to be a member, but you do have to select which set of guidelines you're going to follow, and you need to be able to point to them, even electronically, when asked by a law enforcement officer to produce the appropriate documentation on site. So hours are available electronically, so it can be on your phone, and you can say, see, Excellent. It's right here. And you don't, if you choose not to follow the guidelines, safety guidelines of any CBO, then you default to having to follow the FAA's safety guidelines,
which of course will no doubt be more stringent and more complex than hopefully the levels that we're going to see you guys get approved. That would certainly be it. But thank you for clarifying that. It's a good one, because again, the difference between law, regulation, and guidance is always something that the drone hobby in particular seems to be sort of sometimes overburdened with, in terms of having to understand. I always think that your average hobbyist worldwide needs to know more laws and regulations to be able to conduct their hobby than many other hobbies out there, than many other pastimes out there. So I can understand where people do get sort of frustrated from that point
Yeah,
of
and
view.
in terms of implications, it's also, we are in the States up against a situation where the FAA has final authority of the airspace, and they assert that that's from the blades of grass up into space, and it's called federal preemption. And so, unfortunately, the FAA does not exert in local cases or litigation this federal preemption. It's up to individuals to defend themselves and point to this and point to precedent and statute that this is the case. So this is a situation where an FAA representative or a local law enforcement officer, a town police, a county police, a state police, can come up to you and ask for your documentation. You're not required by law to provide it, but common sense dictates. And in order to maintain your certification, if you're a Part 107 pilot, you then you have to present, and then there are suggested documents that you should be carrying with you. This then falls into a situation of, well, if you're a jerk and you mouth off to the law officer, it's not going to go well. And we've had a number of situations like that, and you can yell at the law officer and tell them that I can fly up to 100 miles an hour, and I'm okay to fly here, and I'm okay to fly at night because I'm recreational and I have my visual observer, so get out of my face. Never a good approach. So so we are certainly trying to advise people on what's the common sense way to do it. An officer comes up to you, says, "Would you mind landing?" Sure, I'll get it. I'll land it right now. And then as a motorcyclist, take the goggles off, present yourself as a human, and then describe what it is, introduce yourself, what the background is. Frequently, it can become a very positive situation. Oh, our department's thinking of getting drones. Yeah, there's one guy who flies. The fire department has them. So there's usually some anecdote where it can be a positive exchange.
Yeah, no, and I do wholeheartedly agree with that type of guidance. It is always, obviously, it's difficult in individual scenarios sometimes to avoid confrontation, and we're all aware of that. But again, the general guidance that needs to go out to every level of flyers certainly needs to be along those lines. I completely agree. So how long do you expect it to take for our first CBOs to spring into official life?
Greater than 90 days. And so the FAA has stipulated that the response could take 90 days. And so, of course, that response could be a rejection. And then we hopefully iterate, and it's hopefully a damped sinusoid where we start getting closer to a solution. And so it becomes a shorter, hopefully it's not 90 and 90 and 90 and 90.
Yes.
So hopefully something very close to 90 days.
Okay, excellent. Well, hopefully you'll come back, and once your CBO, I'm very confident that you guys will be one of the first to gain this status, and certainly will gain the status. You are, by all intents and purposes, the poster child, frankly, of what a CBO should be like. And I mean that from the point of view of not just someone that's going to pander completely to the FAA's wishes, but actually someone that is going to stand up for the freedom of FPV, hence your name, FPV Freedom Coalition. So yes, please do come back and let us know how things go, basically.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you for bearing with us during the middle bit there. That for anybody watching the replay, you won't see that because we'll actually cut that out. We managed to relaunch quick enough so that it actually started within the same stream. I did make a very unfortunate statements which the karma managed to kick me today, which I actually haven't made pre-show for a very long time now with guests and co-hosts, where I did say we haven't had anything go wrong for a very long time, actually, and it all seems to be working fine. And then I get a total crash. So thank you, everybody, for bearing with us. I really do appreciate it. This was an important topic to talk about. I've put a link in the description. There's a couple of links a couple of times in the chat as well. I've seen people asking where can they find checklists, etc. There's fpvfc.org is the place to go. There is. You could spend, I think I intended on going in the first time I went on that website for a few minutes to find out what you guys do and what you're about. And I found myself still there an hour and a half later. There is so much on there, and it is very well organized, and I wholeheartently recommend just going along and engaging with it. Frankly, attend a couple of the live streams before you even before you become a member, etc. Engage and chat and see what they're about, and you'll find that very much like as lucky as we are to have FPV UK here in the UK, I feel like the US are lucky to have organizations like FPV Freedom Coalition out there fighting their corner as well, and it will help the health and the future of the hobby, frankly. So thank you very much. No, thank you.
Yeah, and while we are required to focus on the United States with our 501c3 authorization from the U.S. government, we welcome questions and support and interaction with folks from around the world, and that's what makes this community rich, and we really appreciate it.
Exactly, absolutely. Excellent. Well, again, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you for bearing with us. I really do appreciate it. And we will see you next time on Geeksvana Live. Bye-bye.